1 week season.
Hey, welcome in, OWS fam. Glad that you're with us. We are back in the DFS lab presented by 1 week season, and today it is Monday, so that means the focus is Showdown Monday morning. We're taping this at 9 a.m. Eastern, so we're up early, grinding for you guys. 9 a.m. Eastern, and of course, the guy I'm bringing up today, Xandamere, I believe it's 6 a.m. for him, and we can hear about that in a minute. The two games tonight for Showdown, Bills hosting the Jags, and then the Bengals playing host to the Commanders. The focus for today's video for us will be the Bengals and Commanders. And again, as always, purpose of the show, build a DK lineup. Use that as a vehicle to talk strategy for tonight. I'm your host, Cheeseman, here with you on the lab 4 days a week. As always, if you find value in this content, make sure to like and subscribe. And with that, time to bring up Xandamere. Again, Xandamere, thanks for just grinding here for the audience. It is early for you, so I appreciate you being up early.
It is. That's okay. I think I said this on our first show that I'm a parent. I'm up early anyway. I'm sure many parents in the audience are probably familiar with that. I'm up by this time anyhow. It's not like I'd be asleep, but happy to be here. Coming off of an exciting week 3 in which, as always, right, we saw some chalk hit, we saw some chalk fail, we saw Juwan Jennings be the overall top scoring skill position player on the slate. We saw Andy Dalton and Malik Willis both be top 5 quarterbacks. So, the NFL is a weird place, right? But that makes it fun.
It is. How was week 3 for you?
It was funny. So going into the afternoon games, I felt really good. I didn't have a ton of early game exposure. I was way overweight on Saquon Barkley. I had almost no Cam Akers. I was way overweight on Rome Adunze. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, on the Bears. I was, so if you looked across the ownership, I was way underweight on the Saints as a whole. I had a lot of Alvin Kamara, but outside of that, I was way underweight on a lot of the chalk that failed. I didn't have a lot of, and there were a few pieces that really hit hard that I had a lot of. So I was feeling really good. And in the early start of the afternoon slate, I was feeling great. I felt like I had some lineups in really strong positions. And then Juwan Jennings caught a touchdown and another touchdown and another. And I was like, oh no, because he was a guy I just didn't have a lot of. And I get the case for him, but I won't go into why Juwan Jennings, but I just didn't have a lot of him. I had some, but not a ton. And so then I was like, oh no, I'm going to get dusted. And then towards the end of the slate, we had, what was it? Dak scored a rushing touchdown, then they recovered an onside kick, then he had a passing touchdown. Kyron Williams scored his second touchdown. Jake Ferguson was racking up PPR yards, and I was looking on Owner's Box, which is a smaller site. I love playing on the smaller sites because they often have overlay and softer competition. So I was looking on Owner's Box, and all of a sudden I see this one lineup of mine kind of rising up the standings, and it's all of a sudden in 8th place and then 6th place, and it was a Owner's Box is a super flex site, so you can play 2 quarterbacks instead of playing defense. And so I had a Dak Lamar stack that was rising, and it had Kyron Williams, it had Juwan Jennings, and it's rising up, and it ended up in second. It almost took first, the very last Ravens drive.
Amazing.
I was in a spot where I needed one more Zay Flowers catch, or 15 Lamar rushing yards would have done it, or for the Ravens to give the ball to the Cowboys one more time and rack up a few more Dak passing yards, because the guy in front of me only had Derrick Henry. And it just, it didn't play. Right as I said, I was figuring out the math, and Zay Flowers catches a ball, but it's only for 7 yards. Then Lamar gets 10. I need 15 Lamar rushing yards, but he gets 10, and then the game's over. So it was close. But I got second, so it was a great weekend. I will take it, especially on a weekend when I thought I was about to get, wiped out. And then, Showdown last night. I don't always play Showdowns on Sundays because sort of the deal I made with my family of weekends are busy for me in NFL season, and so I generally don't play Sunday night Showdowns to spend time with my family. But fortunately, it's funny. I feel like the days when I don't play seem to be the days when my game write-ups tend to be very on point. We had a bunch of people who were like, I had a really good night. Thanks for your awesome game write-up. And I'm like, I didn't play it.
Right.
Okay.
Rashee Rice. You liked Rashee Rice, right?
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, that's not like some like outrageously sharp take to be like, I like Rashee Rice. Like he's really good. I mean, no one's caught by surprise by Rashee Rice, but that would have been a spot where like I would have locked him, like he was already highly owned, but I would have locked him. He's incredibly confident in his ability, his role. Darnell Mooney was, I think, a more of a key pick, recognizing his role in the Atlanta offense, that it was not, a 1 week blip, that the guy has a very real role on the Falcons offense. I think it was more of a key. But yeah, it was a good night, I think, for our subscribers last night, which is cool. So anyway, excited. But I get to play tonight, so that's exciting.
Hey, yes, that is awesome. And let's start talking about tonight. So again, the focus of tonight, it's going to be for this video, we're going to look at that Commanders at Bengals game. What's your initial thoughts on this one? Obviously, the Bengals favored by just a little more than a touchdown, and they're at home. And it's a little bit of a situation for the Bengals where they need to get a win. You always have a certain level of expectations when you have a quarterback who's been to the Super Bowl in Joe Burrow. And but again, the Commanders, they're an exciting team with Jaden Daniels, haven't put up a lot of offensive touchdowns so far. So what are your thoughts on this game, and what is Vegas telling us so far?
So Vegas is telling us the Bengals are going to romp, right? Roughly touchdown favorites. I haven't checked the line this morning, but roughly touchdown favorites. Yeah, the Bengals are 0-2, off to a terrible start. They managed to lose to the Patriots at home. Not great, given the Patriots are just not a great team. But the Patriots are a sort of feisty team. Like they can stay in it with their defense. They're well coached. They're generally not a team that makes a lot of mistakes, and they managed to fight the Bengals to a win in week 1. And Jamar Chase wasn't fully up to speed after his camp holdout. And then week 2, they lost to the Chiefs, and that's it's no shame in losing to the Chiefs, right? The Chiefs are obviously an incredible team, but they need a win, right? They need a win. Jamar Chase should be back to really his sort of full practice, full route tree, fully ready to go at this point of the season. T. Higgins is making his return after missing first 2 weeks of the game, first weeks of the season due to injury. I think it was we have a hamstring injury, I think. Hamstring injury. So the Bengals are kind of back to full strength. They need this game. On the Commanders side of things, this is an interesting young team. So, the Commanders are 1-1. They lost to Tampa. They beat the Giants. Most people beat the Giants, except apparently the Browns. So that's, no surprise. But the Commanders, I think their offense has the possibility to be more exciting than I think they might be given credit for. So the Commanders defense stinks, right? They're going to give up a lot of points. But their offense, so Jaden Daniels, the coaching staff has done a pretty good job of putting him in places where he can succeed. He's completed so far 75.5% of his pass attempts, which is incredible. Yeah. His yards per attempt is 7.7. That ranks in the top roughly third of the NFL. So it's not like he's just dink and dunking. His ADOT is really low. They are setting him up with short, easy passes. His yards per attempt is high because his completion rate is high, right? But his actual yards, how far down the field, his ADOT, how far he throws down the field per attempt, is very low. But they're putting him in a position where he can make short, easy passes or take off running. And that's putting him in a position where he can succeed. He's got a pretty good arm. They're going to open up that route tree at some point. He's running the ball really well, and he's got 26 carries in the season. We love quarterbacks who run. The challenge for the Commanders' offense is their pass-catching core is somewhat devoid of talent. Terry McLaurin is a good pass catcher. He's not a wide receiver 1 for a top team. He's clearly not a Jamar Chase or a Justin Jefferson, but he's also not really like a Drake London. He's not a Mike Evans, right? But he's a solid pass catcher. On many teams, he'd be the wide receiver 2. Past that, we'll get into that a little bit more, but past that, the wide receiver core does not have a lot of depth. At tight end, they've got Zach Ertz, who is, a good, capable pass catcher, but he's older now. He's not explosive. He's the guy when you need the 7 yards or whatever, close to the line of scrimmage. He's got good hands. He runs good routes, but he's not explosive. He's not the guy who's going to put the team on his back and carry you to a win. So that's their question mark, right? Is their pass catching core. But this is to me an exciting young offense with, a quarterback who can run, who can also throw, right? Like Anthony Richardson is a quarterback who can run. Whether or not he can throw is still up in the air, right? I throw accurately. So like that's, it's these dual threat quarterbacks. We get excited about them in fantasy because they can run, and we like dual threat quarterbacks who can run. But the throwing part of the game is often harder for them. Like look at Justin Fields, look at Anthony Richardson, right? Look at Marcus Mariota. The last years of NFL are covered with rushing quarterbacks who have a hard time throwing accurately and consistently. And so can Jaden Daniels be that? I don't know, right? It's only 2 games, but so far so good for him, right? So I'm excited about the team's offense, and I think that in this game, the way that I personally want to play it is that the Commanders' offense is able to be more competitive than Vegas is thinking.
I like that. Let's look at DraftKings here, and just stop me if there was anything else you wanted to add. But beyond that,
can I make one quick note real quick? Just while you have this screen up.
Yes,
you will also note there is a 2-game slate today, and there's some big tournaments for the 2-game slate. So the Showdown tournaments are a little smaller, and the 2-game slate is big. The challenge is these 2 games start very closely together. Sometimes when they do a 2-game slate or a 3-game slate, like Thanksgiving is a great example of this, we get a lot of information before we have to make our next decisions. And that's a really key thing to succeeding in DFS on split slates is making decisions after you have more information, because most people will set their lineup and they're done. You won't get as much information this time, but you'll still get some. We should be through about the first quarter of the Jags-Bills game. And so you should have some idea, if you're playing the full slate, you should have some idea of how your full slate lineups are doing. It won't be complete information. You should have some idea. And so then you can consider if you want to use the Commanders Bengals Showdown as a way to sort of position yourself based on how you're doing in the first game to say like, okay, look, my first game, like in the first quarter, I had this relatively low. I had a lot of Keon Coleman, and he wasn't super owned on the 2-game slate. And so, but instead of, the chalk ownership projection was on, I don't even know, I'm just making up names here. The chalk ownership projection was on this other cheap guy instead of Keon Coleman. But I played Coleman, he's doing well. So the risk here is that the other cheap guy beats Coleman out. And so I'm going to play the other cheap guy in the showdown as as a hedge in case he ends up beating my low-owned Keon Coleman, like that kind of thing. Again, you won't have complete information yet, but on other slates to come this year, where you get these split slates, where you get to kind of build as you go, that is a massive, massive edge, because most of the field does not do that. Most of the field just sets their lineups at the start and they're done. And being able to kind of rebuild or use Showdown to hedge positions is a massively plus EV way to approach these slates where the games are split out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on it, but I will just say that's something that I still haven't fully figured out. I mean, a great example, the Thanksgiving slate. It's like, if a lineup is doing a certain way after the first game and you feel like you should do a late swap, it's like, I feel like we could do a whole video on that, just because it's like, what are the scenarios where you would make a switch to a different play when you liked them before the game started? And so I've always been like, well, I liked them before, so why would I swap off them now? But there really is plus EV ways to do that. And so I feel like that could be a whole video in and of itself. But yeah, tonight, you're right. It
sounds like we have an idea for close to Thanksgiving.
Yes, absolutely. I really feel like, yeah. And that's, I mean, I feel like, there certainly has to be a large portion of the field that wants to understand that better and how to do it in a plus EV way without just being like, I'm just going to switch because my first half lineup did bad. And so, or first window of games did bad. And so I'm just going to switch to something else, but maybe not having a great reason for why. So I like that. Okay. So yeah, like you said, though, you got the 2-game slate. We're going to look at the Washington at Cincinnati game here and looking at kind of, yeah, that's right. We typically do a single entry here, right? Something like maybe 5,000 entries. Should we do this one right here? This flea flicker?
Yeah, I'll see that.
Actually, that's multi-entry.
That's okay.
Let's just do it. Let's just head in there.
I
care
more
about
tournament size than number of entries, really. Number of entries does tend to condense ownership a little bit around the chalk, because if you only get one entry, it's harder. It's just psychologically harder for people to pick a more contrarian entry for their single entry that they're building probably by hand. Whereas if it's, 20 or 30 or 50 or whatever entries, even if it's the same size tournament, you're going to see a little more diversity of ownership, because it's easier to say, well, with my 20th lineup or my 50th lineup or whatever, I'm willing to play, I'm willing to play Andre Yoshivas at captain instead of Jamar Chase or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always thought that too. Just there's going to be more, I guess, people taking shots in even when they have 50 plus lineups. So you're going to have more, I guess, dead lineups. I don't know if that's the right way to think about it, but dead lineups in like a large field multi-entry.
Yeah.
Okay, so here, where do we start at captain in this lineup? Again, Washington at Cincinnati. The Bengals favored by 7.5 here.
So let's think about how we can build for this for a minute before we click something in. The most popular captain, I expect, will be Jamar Chase. That's no surprise. Jamar Chase is the best skill position player in the game. He's facing a defense where he should be able to boat race him, right? He's like, his Commanders' defense is not good. But the first thing we have to think about is how does I'm thinking of Yoshivas. How does Jamar Chase not win as captain? And there's two ways. One is if he just has a bad game. Obviously, that means he doesn't win as captain. The second way, on DraftKings specifically, is because DraftKings has the salary multiplier as part of the captain spot, the highest scoring player in the game is not always the optimal captain, because a cheaper captain can be optimal by putting up a strong point per dollar score if that frees up salary that allows you to get other strong plays who also have good games. And so how that actually plays out in reality. Let's say that Jamar Chase has a big game and scores 25 points and is the highest scoring player of the game. Cool. Let's say that Joe Burrow, and I'm just keeping this really simple. Let's say that Joe Burrow and Jaden Daniels both have strong games and put up like 20 to 22 points, right? Now here's the problem. It's hard to put both of those guys in a lineup with Jamar Chase at captain. Let's also further say that none of the really cheap guys, or maybe let's say one cheap guy has a good game. Because if you're putting Jamar Chase captain and you want Burrow and Daniels, what you're also saying is, okay, now I need multiple cheap guys to make the lineup fit. But if none of the cheap guys or only one of the cheap guys has a good game, then you're taking a couple of really low scores. Where if other of the, say, mid to higher end range of guys have strong games, then the overall lineup with Jamar Chase not at captain, even though Jamar Chase is the highest scoring player in the game, the optimal lineup could still be a cheaper guy at captain, because it allows you to have other guys around him at higher price points that put up higher scores. So that's an important distinction to understand, because a lot of people just approach Showdown as like, I'm betting this guy's going to have the highest score, so I'm going to put him in my captain spot. Now, if you're playing on FanDuel, you need the highest scoring guy in your captain spot, because there isn't a salary multiplier. So a simpler format on FanDuel. And if you just want to be able to identify the highest scoring guy and plug him in at captain, like that's your place to play. I like the strategy of DraftKings a little bit more. I think it's more nuanced when it's not just pick the highest scoring guy. So Jamar Chase is a fine captain choice. And I think that there'll be plenty of Jamar Chase captain lineups. I think that people watching this video are probably smart enough to build a decent Jamar Chase captain lineup. I want to go in a slightly different direction. Because I think I don't want to build the chalk lineup, because one, we're still building for a 5,000 entry tournament, and I think that even in a non-huge tournament, you get paid off when you're right. When chalk is chalkier in smaller field stuff, you don't have to be as off the board, but you also get paid off more when you're right, because a larger percentage of the field has the chalk play. So if Chase is 20% owned at captain in the big tournament, he might be 30% owned in this one because it's smaller, and he might be 50% owned at captain in a 100 entry single entry tournament, 100 slot single entry tournament. So you get paid off more when you're right. So let's go a different direction.
Love it.
And the direction I'm going to go is one that might confuse a lot of people and have them be like, wait, what? And I'm going to ask you to scroll way, way down.
Drum roll. Okay.
And we are going to find a guy named Noah Brown. Little up.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Where is he?
There he is.
He's in the top. So Noah Brown is going to be our captain, and let me explain my thinking on this. Noah Brown was on the Texans in the last year in the preseason. He was released in preseason. He signed with the Commanders late. He didn't play in week 1. He played last week, and he played like 20-something% of the snaps, I think, or read or Twitter, 20-something or 30. He caught 3 of 3 targets for 56 yards. He led the team in yardage. He had the highest ADOT. Or Davy Brown might have had the highest ADOT, but he didn't catch anything because he sucks. So I mentioned earlier, right? This team is like they have Terry McLaurin as the wide receiver 1. They've got Zach Ertz. They also have Austin Eckler as a capable running back in the passing game. Noah Brown, by talent, is their wide receiver 2. And the question is, when will his snaps and role match that? He's better than De'Ami Brown. He's better than all the other the sort of ragamuffin wide receivers the Commanders have on their roster. So by talent, he's the wide receiver 2. The question is, when will that sort of emerge? And I don't know. Will it be this week? I'm not sure. I think his role is going to continue to grow. I think that's pretty clear because there's really no one else competing with him behind McLaurin for wide receiver snaps. I think that defenses are going to key on McLaurin and going to keep doing that. They've been trying to run McLaurin. They've been throwing McLaurin like a third of his passes have come at or behind the line of scrimmage. So, they're trying to get the ball in McLaurin's hands, which is sharp. They should get the ball in McLaurin's hands, but they're also having to do so in, very fantasy unfriendly ways. And Noah Brown's going to be the guy who's going to get less defensive attention, and he's going to run a little more downfield. So I think he's got upside. He showed he was a capable pass catcher with significant upside last year with the Texans. Obviously a great quarterback situation for him last year on a great passing offense. But, he had multiple 100+ yard games last year with the Texans when he was given an opportunity when someone was hurt. So I think he's talented. So this is an example of this is an ascending player. His role is growing and is going to grow. And I don't know if his role is going to be huge this week, but generally speaking in DFS, we want to be early rather than late to situations like this.
I was going to say that.
You're not always going to make it, right? Sometimes you're going to be too early. Sometimes you're going to be too early and it's not going to pay off because Noah Brown might play 40% of the snaps this week and get 4 targets. And that could happen. There's a viable range of outcomes for Noah Brown is 40% of the snaps. But I'd rather take the risk of being early because Noah Brown, if and when he becomes the wide receiver 2 on this team, is going to be much more owned, and he's going to, he's going to carry a much higher salary. His showdown salary is going to be 5, 6, 7K instead of the 3,200 that he is. Right? You're seeing 4,800 there because it's the captain multiplier, but his base salary is 32. So this is a spot where I'm willing to take the risk and say I want to try to be early because if I'm right, the payoff could be awesome. And I don't know if I'm right, but I'm willing to take the risk for the potential payoff. And look how much salary that leaves us.
It's huge, yeah. And you're right about Noah Brown. I wish I had more of him the week that he broke the slate last year. I remember the week, but it was like 30, 35 fantasy points. He certainly has it in him.
I was just running a rule that part of the season of just every roster must have at least one Texan on it.
Yes.
And so yeah, that was a good week.
It was, yeah. I remember at 1 week season, it was one of those weeks where the channel where the people put their binks was pretty full.
Yeah, the Noah Brown. It's funny. Noah Brown is a fan favorite during 1 week season for that.
Yes,
so anyway,
indeed.
Let's move on. We're kind of, obviously, I'm sorry, I'm long-winded. We always run later than we intend to.
No, people love it. I think just keep rolling here.
We're good. And let's go. I'm gonna rapid fire a couple really quick. We're gonna put in Jaden Daniels because we're running one of his pass catchers, and we know the correlation between a pass catch. If Noah Brown does well, Noah Brown is so cheap that he can have a really good game for his price. He doesn't have to bring Jaden Daniels along with him, right? Noah Brown could have 50 yards and a touchdown and be the optimal captain, and that's not enough production to push Jaden Daniels into a big score. But they are still positively correlated. You could feasibly run Noah Brown naked, and that's fine, the captain. But I want Daniels because I'm betting overall. I'm also just betting on the Commanders being more competitive this game, and so I like Daniels as a running quarterback. I like we're betting on him to succeed in the passing game more so than he has so far. Like, keep in mind, Jaden Daniels has one 28-point fantasy game and a 13-point fantasy game. He doesn't have a passing touchdown yet. So add a passing touchdown to him, and he's gonna put up a lot of points. We're gonna put in Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow because we think that the matchup here is awesome. Right? The matchup for the Bengals is awesome. We talked about Chase. We wanted Chase. And here's the thing: it's hard to build lineups with these 3 guys, right? Because of how these three guys are all over 10K. It's really hard to get lineups with these three in them without a really thin punt play. And so we're betting that the really thin punt play is like the super cheap guys, like the I don't know, Drew Samples of the world. We're betting that none of them hit. And if they don't, we're in good shape, because most rosters that have these three guys are going to have one of those really cheap punt plays, because they're going to be using one of these three guys in captain.
No, I love how you are making multiple bets, like you just said right there, because not only are you, taking Noah Brown and taking a bet on him, but you're also betting that most people are going to want to build these three in Daniels, Chase, Burrow. And so they're going to be looking, like you said, to those really thin punts. And the other bet is that none of those really work out, and people have their lineups littered with zeros or 1 or 2 fantasy points, and so this lineup is taking that multiple bet strategy.
Yeah, it's worth noting that a lot of Showdown lineups die because of thin punt plays that score under 3 or 4 points, right? And like that's a lot of Showdown lineups die that way. And sometimes those punt plays hit, and it feels awesome. It feels great when you find the $200 min salary punt at 2% ownership. It puts up 10 points and you win because of it. That feels great. But most of the time, like, these guys are $200 for a reason. Most of the time, their roles are very small and they don't do anything.
Absolutely.
So moving on, now we're down to 6,400 in salary, and so there's a couple different directions we can go. And so if you look at this, just quickly take a look at the salary. We could go down to sort of like the mid-range, like there's like Austin Eckler's. Austin Eckler's kind of a little higher up. There's Yoshibas, who, if we want to get another Bengals pass catcher. There is Mike Gesicki, who's another Bengals pass catcher, had a big game last week. I note in the write-up the Bengals threw like half their pass attempts against the Chiefs, their tight ends. It's like their tight ends racked up like 16 targets last week. So I would not count on 9 targets again for Mike Gesicki. They were clearly focused on the tight end of the passing game against the Chiefs. I think that was opponent specific. But he's an option, right? We could do something like a Zach Moss. We could try to shove in some like a Terry McLaurin, but that gets us down to that punt range again. I don't think that's terrible, right? Because again, it's hard. You talked about how hard it is to fit 3 of the studs. It's really hard to fit 4 of them. So like Terry McLaurin would be a viable path here. You'd have to put an uncomfortable punt at the end. And there aren't really great options down there, but that's a viable path. But the path I want to go in this particular lineup, like I would build this lineup multiple ways. If I were building like for multi-entry, I would start with this core and then mix and match some options around it. But for this particular lineup, the next pick I want to make is Zach Moss.
Okay, let's see.
He's higher up.
Oh shoot, yeah. There we go.
Yeah. So Zach Moss, prior to the season, the thinking was that Zach Moss and Chase Brown would be in a roughly 50-50-ish timeshare. And in most formats, Chase Brown's ADP was actually higher than Zach Moss's, or lower, closer to 1, right? He was picked a little bit earlier than Zach Moss, so they were pretty close. So far, Zach Moss has led them in snaps by a significant margin. He's got 26 running back opportunities in total to Chase Brown's 10. Most importantly, I think a lot of the thought was that Chase Brown was the more talented pass catching back. So far, Zach Moss has 5 targets to Brown's 3. So this isn't really looking like a 50-50 split. This isn't even looking like a 1A, 1B split. This is looking like an RB1, RB2 split. And so getting, what looks like the Bengals RB1 in a great matchup as a big home favorite at 7,800, Zach Moss is not priced for his role. And so the reason he's not is 26 touches in 2 games doesn't seem exceptional. But what we have to recognize is, one, the Bengals, they lost to the Chiefs, they lost to the Patriots, and then they were ahead for most of the game against the Chiefs. But their play volume in both games was below average. And you generally expect play volume to, over time, revert to the mean. Generally, 60 to 63 plays per game-ish is about NFL average. And so they've been low on play volume, which takes away, obviously, opportunities for everyone in the offense, including Moss. So I think that he's being priced based off of his touch count, his workload. But when it comes to running backs, the single biggest predictor of future scoring is not touches, it's snaps. So Zach Moss's snap count is really robust. And so I think he is too cheap in such a good matchup. And he's not going to go overlooked by the field, right? But he's just too cheap in a really good matchup for a reasonably talented back on a good offense in an elite matchup. He checks like all the boxes. And he should be 9K. So we're getting a big discount on him.
Yeah, man, that's great. Yeah, and I think another great data point there. Snap count is the data point that predicts future success. Love that.
Yeah.
So that leaves us 5K remaining, one spot left here. What do you want to look at?
Yeah, so scroll on down, and we'll see what we can afford. And so there's a couple options here. The two kickers stand out, right? The Bengals defense would be a viable option. Now, it's easy to say, hey, you're running a Commanders captain. Why would you play Bengals defense? That happens all the time, actually, because pass catchers and opposing defenses are not as negatively correlated as you might think, right? Defenses tend to really be optimal when they get a touchdown. And the thing about a defensive touchdown is it gives the ball right back to the other offense. And so imagine, like, the dream scenario is, the Commanders march down the field, Noah Brown picks up a couple of catches, they get a turnover at the they get an 80-yard defensive touchdown, and then they get the ball back and get to do it all over again. So point being is it's not like, I generally wouldn't play a defense with the opposing quarterback captain, because that is a big negative correlation, or the opposing running back captain. But with an opposing pass catcher captain, I think it's fine. However, I'm not going to do that. I'm talking about the options here. I'm not going to do that. Where I'm going to go here is I'm going to go with Austin Seibert, kickers. And we could have done either kicker. And so I want to talk about how I think about kickers in lineups, because I think that's an important topic.
I'm listening.
Because I often hear this in our Discord of like, well, which kicker? They're generally priced very closely together, and so a lot of times you have this decision of, I can put a kicker in which one. The reason I'm choosing Seibert is a couple reasons. One, I'm building this around this lineup is built around the idea of the Commanders keeping the game competitive. But if you look at the lineup and how the salary is distributed, most of the salary is on the Bengals side, right? Roughly 30K of salary on the Bengals side, with Seibert roughly 20K of salary on the Commander side. Point is, with these expensive Bengals, we're going to need touchdowns, right? Zach Moss, he could get through yardage with a couple of catches, but he probably needs a score. Jamar Chase almost certainly needs a score. Joe Burrow's going to need a couple of scores. We're going to need touchdowns for these Bengals in order to pay off. A bunch of field goals, it's going to make it harder for these guys to hit. On the Commander side, Noah Brown is so cheap that he doesn't need a touchdown to hit. If he gets 5 catches for 80 yards, there's a really good chance that this play pays off and he's the optimal captain.
Yeah.
Jaden Daniels, as mentioned before, has put up a respectable score and a great score while not scoring a passing touchdown. Now, he scored a couple rushing touchdowns in week 1, but because of his rushing role, which is 26 carries in 2 games, Jaden Daniels can feasibly put up a tournament-worthy score while scoring probably needs 1, but 1 to 2 touchdowns. He doesn't need a ton of scoring. So there's a path here where the Commanders rack up a lot of yardage, but there are multiple field goal opportunities. And that still gets Noah Brown and Jaden Daniels enough points, but by marching down the field and scoring once or twice, there's enough fantasy goodness there for them to put up tournament-worthy scores. It's a little harder on the Bengals side to get Zach Moss, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow all fantasy-worthy scores in a game that we are also believing the Commanders are competitive in, and have Evan McPherson get enough field goals to be optimal. Now, this is different in a, say, 5-1 onslaught build, in a Bengals onslaught build, because if you're building a Bengals onslaught build, you're also betting that the overall fantasy scoring in the game is lower because the Commanders aren't really contributing to any of it, right? You're only putting one commander in your lineup in that scenario. And so it's easier for the kicker to be one of the top 5 scorers in that Bengals onslaught scenario, because you're already sort of hypothesizing there aren't as many big commander scores. But in this one, I think I have a slight lean towards Seibert over McPherson, just for that reason. I also just want, again, competitive game environment. You don't have to go this way. You don't have to do 3-3 builds, competitive game environment. But if that's what I'm building for, I'm going to lean a little more towards a 3-3 build. Again, in reality, if I were building this lineup multiple ways, I do one with Seibert and one with McPherson. But if I'm picking one, I'm going to go Seibert.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. And there it is. There's the lineup. Xandamere, love your thoughts as always. Last week, I literally, even after being on the show with you when we were talking about the Eagles and Falcons game, I went back later and watched it. That's how sharp this stuff is. So really appreciate you taking the time. As always, man. I mean, thanks for joining the show and giving us some sharp Showdown thoughts.
It's been a pleasure. We also managed to finish before my daughter woke up and come downstairs. So go us. We're getting better at the whole concise thing.
Exactly. Well, guys, thanks for being with us on the lab. Hope you have some great luck tonight in Showdown, however you choose to play, whichever game you choose to target. And we'll catch you next time. Make sure to join the show tomorrow. Hyla will be on. And good luck tonight, guys. We'll see you.
See you at the top of the leaderboards.